everybody, welcome to the latest episode of the Dog and Bandits. I'm Orrin Phillips, and we have a sort of comic adjacent episode for you today, and you'll find out what I mean about that in a second. Our guest is none other than author Christopher Irving. Chris has done a number of books for TwoMorrows Publishing, including his latest book called Cliffhanger: Cinematic Superheroes of the Serials, 1941 to 1952. For those who might not know, these were the precursor to the MCU and all the other superhero movies we love. He had Captain Marvel, he had Captain America, Dick Tracy, The Phantom, all these wonderful strips and a whole lot more. They are all chronicled in his book. It's really something that you should, might want to check out. It's a fun read. It's very informational. And talking to Chris was an absolute blast. He's a comic fan. He's in education. And he talked about, what made him want to do this book. So without further ado, here is Mr. Chris Irving. Chris Irving, author of so many wonderful publications for TwoMorrows and other books as well. Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, sure thing, man. Thanks for having me.
So let's start at the very beginning. How did you first become interested in comic books?
Wow. Hold on one second. I'll go. Right. This is how I first became interested in comics history. I mean, I always had comic books, right? The first comic book that got me going back month to month was G.I. Joe by Larry Hama, which is I still to this day swear one of the greatest monthly comic book series ever made. And Larry is, I feel, an unsung genius, I actually did a whole book on him for University of Mississippi Press because, I believe that so strongly. But I'm sorry, my son, I have to listen for him. So this was my father's copy. And he brought it down from the attic. My dad was big into pop culture. He was a disc jockey at a small town radio station. Eventually, that was his dream job, and he got it. He was a fiend when it came to baseball stats, when it came to television, of course, oldies. And he happened to have this book from when he was in the Air Force in the 60s. And for those of you who don't know the great comic book heroes, it's the first great book on comics history by Jules Feiffer, the genius playwright, cartoonist, Renaissance man. And it has these stunning reprints of early Golden Age comics from the 1940s. I prefer not to use the term Golden Age, but that's the one we used. So I kept asking Dad if I could read this book. I'd be like, hey, Dad, can I look at your comic book? And eventually it's just like, I want you to have it, son. So this went with me on vacations. And when I started doing conventions, I started getting it autographed. And this was just to give you guys, because I know I look like I'm in my 20s, but I wasn't in my 20s in the 2000s. It was the 90s. But I got Jules Feiffer at one point at SPX. And this book it's in good shape, but it's been loved and read.
Yeah.
I have I got Jerry Robinson, I got Shelley Moldoff for Hawkman, Marty Nodell for Green Lantern, Will Eisner for The Spirit. This was a time in which these original comics creators were still alive. And Joe Simon was a big one that I got. I didn't get him till I was doing Graphic NYC in New York. And he was kind of my great white whale of interviews, and he was 98. And it was one of the very few times I've ever gotten really nervous or excited before an interview. I won't tell you how that manifested, but let's just say my ex-girlfriend's terrible roommate still never knows what hit her bathroom. And I got Joe's autograph, and Joe was an absolute delight. And as part of Graphic NYC, Seth, my partner on GNYC, Leaping Tall Buildings, got a Jules Feiffer. It was quite frankly one of the best days of my life, because Jules was an incredibly kind man. He was super sweet, made us coffee. It's a terrible cup of coffee, but I didn't care. He made it. And it was a pretty special day for me, because Jules is the reason I'm here now. He's the reason I'm able to teach comic books at VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University, and yeah. So that's how I got into it, and that's the short version, believe it or not.
So, I mean, you talked about it a bit, but how did you decide, okay, I love comic books. I want to write about comic books. I want to research. I want to talk to the people who put all these things together.
Yeah, well, so I went to this university I'm teaching at now and finishing up my PhD at is where I went as an undergrad. VCU in Richmond, Virginia. It's where Mike Wieringo went. Mike was drawing The Flash, which was my favorite comic book, in the 90s, with Mark Waid writing it. And that inspired me to go to VCU art school because I wanted to draw comics like Mike Wieringo. God bless Mike. He was I got to meet him and know him a little bit. He was the sweetest man. But while I was at VCU, I started doing music reviews for a local chain of record stores, Plan 9. I was a terrible reviewer, but they still paid me in credit. I did concerts. That kind of led to me editing the entertainment section of the VCU paper, I guess in 97. And I was doing comic book reviews early on, and everyone hated it, because I was the only non-mass comm major. I was in art education at the time. And I wanted to write about comics. And I'm like, oh, don't write. Oh, comics go in the comics section. I'm like, no, it's good. I did a piece. I did an interview eventually on Superman's, whatever it was, 60th or so. And I interviewed like Mike Carlin and maybe Dan Jurgens, and like, oh, it goes in the funnies. They were idiots. But point I'm trying to make is that I reviewed Kingdom Come, and someone working at VCU saw that and emailed because she knew Mark Waid, who had gone to VCU back in the 70s, and he's 3 credits shy of graduating, and he dropped out. And so he was like, yes, I would love to interview Mark Waid. So I ran. I've never interviewed anyone on. I think I'd interviewed the musician Vic Chestnut. I don't know if you knew him. He was really talented. So I ran to Radio Shack, boys and girls, and others. So it's a little switch box. And what you do is you plug your phone into it. This is the exact one I bought in November 97. And it says record and play. And you plug your phone into it, and then you plug this guy into a shoebox recorder and you record. And I interviewed Mark Waid, and I had to really learn how to transcribe. And Mark told me one of the ways he broke into comics was he's like, I started interviewing people and I networked. And so I made that my goal. I started interviewing for a local comic book store's website, and I picked up the phone after Mark and I called DC Comics. And one thing I learned, so the thing in reviewing music and going to review concerts is I would find a band's, I would look at Polestar.com and see what shows were coming to the area. Or I would follow a band like The Cure. I would call up their record label, ask for their PR agent, get their PR agent, say, hey, I'm a freelance writer and I'm writing for the Commonwealth Times at VCU or Plan 9's magazine. I would love comps. So I learned how to work that system and how to be professional. You're only as professional as you sound, right? And people always assumed I was older because I came out of the womb with a deep voice. So I used that to call, and I called DC and asked for their promotional person. I got Patty Cheris, who was wonderful and one of the most important people ever in my career, because she believed in me and I think she gave me Chuck Dixon, maybe. And I interviewed Chuck. And then she gave me another person. And I was like, yeah. It was almost like, yes, sir, may I have another? Come on, keep them on me. I also called, Marvel was a nightmare to get through. They were, I think eventually got 1 or 2 interviews. I got Joe Cassett, someone not in comics as their PR, and it was a mess. And Dark Horse had Shauna Gore, then Shauna Irving Gore, who I became really good friends with as well. Jamie Reilly at Kitchen Sink Press was wonderful. And so I got to really meet these PR people, and I just started doing it. And then one day I decided, hey, I want to research this character I've got a fascination with called the Blue Beetle. I loved the Golden Age Blue Beetle and decided to do a research on it. And so I just started writing it, and then I started pitching it to magazines, and like a lot happened really fast. My first, let's see, it was December 99. It was published in the Kirby Collector, because I'd been reading their magazines, and I called, and there's a number, and I called TwoMorrows, and John's like, "TwoMorrows, it's John Morrow," and I'm like, "Hey, John." Well, hey, you know how John is. Like, I'd been working on my John imitation for like 2 decades at this point. But John was, he gave me a shot with that, and he introduced me to Roy at Alter Ego, and I wanted to write about the Blue Beetle even more, and he got me in touch with John Cook at CBA, because John was doing a Charlton thing, and that snowballed and turned into 2 issues, and we uncovered a lot of things no one had documented before. So it all just kind of like hit at the same time, and it was crazy and exciting. I'm still very proud of the work I did then.
Oh, it's definitely. And of course, now Blue Beetle movie is out. Thoughts on that?
My shrine to Blue Beetle. I've got the popcorn container Cinemark that I paid $30. Whoa. Okay, my pointing's off. It's right there.
I see it up there. Yep.
Yeah, I saw that sucker opening day with my dear friend Brett Carreras, who owns and runs the Virginia Comic Con. And is a godfather of my son, actually. Yeah, Blue Beetle's amazing. I'm so happy the film is so great. And for so many reasons, not just representation, that's so important to me. I have a 6-year-old boy. I don't want all of his heroes to be straight white dudes. I mean, really, like they need to be from all backgrounds. And what I love about Blue Beetle is it's just it's just on one level, it's a great superhero movie. On another, they really got what made Ted Kord so likable. And you don't even see Ted.
Right.
And you can tell they know Ted. But also it just felt so sincere. I can't speak to representation of a Mexican American family because, I'm not Mexican American, but I didn't feel like they were too scared to make white people uncomfortable because it's too ethnic, and which is one of the complaints you'd hear like 20 years ago. I loved it. I loved the film. I've seen it twice, which I don't really do much anymore. So yeah, it's also kind of a nice, I'll tell you, the Blue Beetle Companion, which I wrote in 2006, which is a book that I am immensely and eternally grateful to John Morrow for letting me do it kind of on my own terms. He really let me. I wrote it as an essay book. All TwoMorrows books then were just like Q&As mostly, with a few essays. He gave design, but a lot of people are like, why the hell are you doing the Blue Beetle? And no, Blue Beetle matters. Blue Beetle matters heavily. And I didn't have access to the level of comics that we do now with, public domain scans. So that's something I'll be revisiting once I finish a dissertation and whatever, before I die, I'm going to revisit it.
It's on the list. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Blue Beetle, let's talk about Cliffhanger, because there would be no Blue Beetle movie if it wasn't for these serials that have come out.
Maybe not. I don't know.
True.
But yeah.
So how did you come up with the idea to focus on these early films and really kind of tell their story and tell the story of the people who are in it?
Yeah, well, there are a few different, gosh, I was actually working at TwoMorrows for a year. That's back when I knew everything. I was talking to John about it just a few months ago. I'm like, yeah, well, I did know everything back then. But so in 2001, I interviewed, well, okay. I wrote a tribute essay to Gray Morrow after his death for comic book artist. And I never met Gray, but his wife, Coco, who is like an aunt to me, really kind of took me in and was just so gracious. I wound up like inheriting I'm sitting in Gray Morrow's chair right now. This was his studio chair, and I inherited his table, but I found a home to a colleague of mine who's a practicing comics artist. And one of the things I also, Poco, in moving from their cabin to a much smaller house for her, she just gave me a box of his movie serials. They were VHS tapes he recorded. And I had seen the Captain Marvel serial, and the Batman ones were released at some point. Superman, I think I got the Superman ones on VHS, the first one, not Superman versus Adam Man. So I had an appreciation of them. But with this box of tapes, I would come home from my job as an elementary art teacher, and I'd make some coffee, and I'd watch 2 serials to unwind, 2 different ones. And it really made me appreciate the form way more, warts and all, because they're bloody absurd. And I know my friend George Corey was doing a book on TV superheroes, and I don't know if it was in reaction to that, but it just kind of came up. I'm like, John, I think that we need to not treat these things in a vacuum, like superhero movies, or comic books. Like, it's all the same. Like, when you study the superhero, you're studying multiple genres. I'm sorry, multiple media. A single genre, multiple media. That's how the superhero develops. That's actually part of the main crux of my dissertation on Superman that I'm working on. And John was like, yeah, sure. That sounds great. And so I started working on it. Kind of left TwoMorrows and decided to go with another publisher, and that didn't work out, which is fine. So I had a completed first draft, and I was just kind of sitting on it for a little bit. I moved to New York, did Leaping Tall Buildings in graphic NYC for a few years, got a master's degree, came back, and eventually was like, you know what? I've got this book. And I think it's even more relevant now because the Marvel Cinematic Universe uses a similar, it's the movie serials in the MCU. The DC ones tried it, but it didn't quite succeed. But they're created to give viewers regular viewing habits, right? You see one, you have to see the next. There's a little bit of a cliffhanger of a sorts. They're called like the stingers at the end of Marvel movies. And also more serials were accessible. More material was accessible. So I went back to John. I'm like, hey, I don't know if you're still interested in this. In the interim, John had found a World War II in comics article I wrote years ago for a project that didn't happen because TwoMorrows canceled it. It would have been a magazine project. And John was like, hey, this is a great article. Can I put it in Kirby Collector? I'm like, yeah, sure. And he ran it. So I was like back at TwoMorrows for the first time in about, I don't know, 18 years or so. And it just worked. Like, you know what I mean? It all, I was able to have Rich Fowkes design it, Rich is one of my best friends. And the best book experience I've ever had was the Blue Beetle companion, because it was me and Rich. There's no drama. There was nothing. It was just us doing our book. And Cliffhanger was a lot that way. It was me and Rich doing our book. So long and short of it is that's how it happened. I have to, every interview I do, I have to credit Morania Press's Ed Hulse, Hulse. Ed is the best movie serial historian. He interviewed a lot of those actors and directors. And Ed is an amazing resource. He believes in research. He doesn't believe in, making stuff up like some people I've encountered around movie serials. It's amazing. If someone gets offended when you ask them for their source, that means that yeah. But Ed was like a wonderful sounding board. He was very helpful, and his work is authoritative. So like I can't take much credit in light of all of the work Ed did, because Ed is the person who really, like, that draft I had from 2008, like, tripled in length and way better because of the work that Ed has done that I was able to refer to. So, always hats off to Ed.
I remember my dad had gotten me the I guess 89 VHS tapes of the Batman serial. And I watched them, and it was on TCM for a little while, and I was showing them my kids, and they kind of rolled their eyes like, oh, it looks so silly, and the costumes. And I think back to something my dad told me, that these series and all these movies and TV, well, there really wasn't a lot of TV at the time. It was mainly movies, but that was sort of a new medium. So folks who would come to movies, it was an experience for them. And they didn't, they weren't as jaded as we are now with special effects. They saw this on screen, and it was, really brought to life.
You know what? The audience is different. Those were meant for kids. Like Flash Gordon did really well, but Flash Gordon was a really expensive serial. The audiences were really different. And this is my cat Eccleston Draper.
Yeah.
So he wants food. So I mean, the audiences were different. That's because I actually was just showing those in my Batman and media class. And I'm like, guys, and like the Columbia serials were not the best ones. The Republic ones, like, man, you put on Spy Smasher or Captain Marvel, they had the best stunt people, and the special effects from the Lydecker brothers, I feel like some of them still work and still hold up today, 80 years later. But yeah, I mean, it's so, I love discussing the context of these things, especially with younger generations, because they help me see it in a different way as well. But to be able to tell them, oh God, I was explaining dial-up to one of my students the other day. I'm like, well, it's not like you're on dial-up. What do you mean? So kind of going with what you're saying, maybe movie serials are like the dial-up of superhero productions, but show them I'm sure you have, but the 66 Batman is just such a great follow-up.
Oh, most definitely. Did you get the feeling that a lot of these serials were done, and I hate to use the term, but sort of an Ed Wood style of, let's just get it in a couple of takes and just keep this thing going?
Oh yeah, totally. There's William Whitney's memoir. It's a really long-winded title, Out of the Door into it. But he talks about how they had like telephone book size scripts, and they had. I think the difference is the producers. So many of the Columbias were produced by later on Sam Katzman, who was a cheapskate and apparently pocketed the extra money. He had a director named Spencer Bennett, and Spencer as a stunt person on, I think, A Perils of Pauline. He was paid to do a dive, and he did it twice because the first time the camera didn't get it. And he directed the last serial, Blazing the Overland Trail. So he was an actor, stuntman, director. And Bennett was very much just like, get on your mark, do this, do that. And that's what I've been told by a lot of actors, or I've read, because most of them have died. I talked to Johnny Duncan, who played Robin in the second Batman serial. That was a while ago. But the difference is Columbia didn't have the stunt people that Republic did. Republic cast their heroes around the stunt person performing. That's how seriously they took it. They also, the problem that Bennett had, and Bennett was a great director. Like he worked for Republic when Whitney was away during the war. I mean, Bennett was a phenomenal director. The problem is that Bennett prided himself again on coming in under budget. And so his bid to cheapskate Sam Katzman was, hey, I'll save you money. And he did save him money. So Katzman kept shrinking his budgets. And so he had to do them faster and quicker. That didn't necessarily mean better, right? So yeah, I mean, there was a real workmanlike quality, but I've done a lot of acting here. A friend of mine does true crime and war reenactments, and he reminds me, Kevin Hirschberger is his name, and he reminds me a lot of kind of the movie serial director type, because with Kevin, like, we get it done. Like, boom, 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 boom. And, we don't, most of the time, we don't even have a script, because there's going to be a voiceover, so we kind of ad lib. But it's very much about, like, he has a very small crew, and I've seen him knock things out, and they look great because he has a great cinematographer. It's my friend Hugh, and so they light it well, and like they know how to. They have a system figured out, and it's so much quicker, and it looks better than some of the other productions I've worked on, where the director decides to be brilliant and is, they don't have it together, right? So, but I mean, William Whitney, I mean, the work he did is just phenomenal. I also think the work on the Captain America serial, directed by John English, and his co-director's name is evading me now, but I think it was mostly English. One of the nicest looking serials I've seen. Now, let's forget that the guy who played Captain America had, like, he was a little stocky and pudgy and double chin and a Jersey accent, and he's kind of one of the worst superhero actors ever. But he had some damn fine stuntmen, let me tell you. But yeah.
And there's one that it's not really a comic theme, but that was in your book, and I'm struggling if it was Gene Autry or Roy Rogers that was so out there that not only is he the singing cowboy, but then he goes out into space and there's a futuristic world.
The Phantom Empire by Gene Autry. Gene Autry apparently could not ride a horse worth a damn. But according to, I think it was William Whitney's book. Yeah, so the Phantom Empire, I think it's what the Phantom Menace was named in honor of. It's a mascot. They were absorbed into Republic in the 30s, but it was like 1935. I want to say, give or take a year or two. And it's this bizarre serial where singing cowboy Gene Autry has a ranch, and they do their radio show at the ranch. But there's this underground empire, and they want, I can't even remember why, but basically, like, there's the line, Gene Autry must die. And so, like, they kidnap Gene Autry, and it's like Flash Gordon almost. And it's just got ray guns. It's a weird movie serial, but it's kind of great. You know what I mean? I mean, Gene Autry must die. It's such an absurd. Yeah, I just check. It's on, guys. It's on YouTube. It's on Archive, I'm sure. Phantom Empire. Check it out for a good laugh. There's also, I was not told about this until, so I moderate for GalaxyCon, and I was in Raleigh, and I bumped into my friend Patty Hawkins, who's another moderator. And I had a copy of the book. I said, oh yeah, this is great. This looks great. Have you seen J-Men Forever? It's my favorite movie. So basically, these two comedians, and Philip Proctor from Firesign Theater, and his partner, they basically did a mashup of Republic movie serials, and they not only edited it into its own story, but they, like, totally dubbed over the whole thing. And it's on Tubi. And we just Patty and I talked to Philip Proctor and Terrence McGovern. Terry also did a voice in there. And it's on my podcast. But that's something I really wish I'd known about when I was doing the book, because it celebrates the absurdity of these movie serials. They call Captain Marvel the Caped Madman, and he's just like a complete psycho. Spy Smasher, Spy Swatter. That's another one to check out. But yeah, I mean, I think part of, it would be easy for someone to say, oh, well, these are just dumb. They're dumb. They're cheap. They're old. Well, yeah, some of them are dumb, and some of them, well, they are all cheap. And yes, they are old. But the people who created these were some of their legends in the industry. Yakima Canet, the stuntman, Davy Sharp. I mean, the stunt people alone at Republic, each one's a legend. But also they really informed kind of how we experience superheroes on the big screen. I mean, the Batman 60s show that's an homage in many ways / parody of the Batman movie serials.
I think you mentioned the book as well that, this was also helping sell the comics too. Kids would maybe see this like, oh, go out there and do this now. I know, you and I were pretty much the same age when Batman came out in '89. We were trying to grab Batman books as fast as we can.
Yeah,
that doesn't seem to be happening anymore with the current movies and comic books. Why do you think that bridge got broken, and do you think it could ever be repaired again?
That's a big question. That's kind of like, while I'm at it, let me think of how to fix the comics industry. Continuing my thought, I do think the industry is broken. They are, and it's because they're both owned by these huge corporations that really don't care about comics. They don't care about the comics. They just care about the money they can make off of the properties. So I don't think like Time Warner, whatever, or Disney, I don't think that they look at ways they can make money off the comics, because the comics, like the circulation numbers are so minuscule. So low. And that you can, we've all had these conversations. It could be the loss of the newsstand. It could be the price point's too high, or maybe it's not high enough, or maybe all the kids are online now, or maybe they're all on their phones, or maybe they're doing other things. I mean, think about, like, I'm trying to see this through the eyes of like someone who's the head of a corporation, and comics is just a small, tiny part of it, which means that comics is a small, tiny part of their profit margin. And again, I don't know the specific numbers. This is all hypothetical. So, if someone like Dan DiDio, who has that level of experience, like, I mean, if anyone would know, it would be someone like Dan, or Paul Levitz, of course, or Joe Quesada, who can speak to it better. But my guess is that it would probably cost more money to try and promote comics to the point where they would make enough of a profit to be worth anything to the CEOs and to the bottom line. That's just a guess and a hunch. I feel like you also have a lack of synergy between both media. So it's not like the biggest issue I have is legacy characters. I think you need to have more commitment behind a legacy character, and I'm looking at Marvel when I say this. With the movies, they have to have that because they hire actors, and actors age out, or they just want to move on to other things. So we have Sam Wilson is Captain America. That's it. In the comics, Sam Wilson's the only Captain America for like maybe half a year, maybe a year. But now he's just another Captain America. So it becomes Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson. And I don't think that's doing Sam the credit and attention he deserves. I think he should be front and center as Cap. Tell like Steve Rogers' past stories or whatever. But you have, I mean, it's weird because you have, one part, it's kind of like talking out of both sides of your mouth. On one hand, Disney's like, oh yeah, okay, well, we're gonna have these legacy characters because it's a practicality. It's something we have to do. And it happens that we can, bring these amazing actors of color and female actors and so forth forward in these roles. That's how it should be, right? But the other side of the mouth here is comics. And comics is very much like, oh, well, we need to keep our dudes who are in their 40s, who are our primary audience, happy. And then you look at what Marvel's doing. Like, I don't even think they do regular monthly series out. They'll just like run it for like 2 years max, and then they'll do a new number one. So are they really thinking about how that's accessible to the new readers they could potentially get through the movies? It's not.
Hmm.
I try to explain to my 19-year-old students, they're like, hey, I want to start reading Batman. It's worse for Marvel because, again,
It's being
I want to
revamped.
start reading Thor. Where do I start? And it's a nightmare, dude.
Yeah.
Like when we were kids, it's like, hey, I picked up Batman 428, Death of Robin. That told me there were 427 issues before it. That's fine.
Right.
I'm coming on here. I can figure it out.
Hmm.
You had editors and you had write accessible for new readers. Let's find ways that they can follow it. And then it just became about, hey, let's have a new number one. I don't know. It's just, again, that's such a big question that I'm just like, I try to give up on it, but it's kind of like I feel like in some ways the industry's going really backwards. A lot of people complained when DC did New 52. Okay, I didn't like a lot of New 52, but the fact that they did New 52 got some new readers into comics, which they have not had for ages. I think people want to see a fresh start, and maybe that would bring more in. But again, I don't feel like the companies are really making that commitment 100%. Right. New 52, the big problem with that was they kept Batman and Green Lantern the same. And it was a mess. It was a half-assed reboot because it's like you either got to reboot it or you don't. And you need to know what you're doing with your flag character. If you don't know what you're doing with Superman, then you need to go back to the drawing board. Yep. But the other stuff, Animal Man was phenomenal, Swamp Thing, Frankenstein, what Dan referred to as his New 52 were those books. I don't know, man. It's just like, I have this crazy theory. I call it the 10-year universe. And I think that publishers should, if they're going to have to reboot, if they want to keep things fresh, do a new universe, make it a reboot. Don't make the reboot part of the story, because that's where it gets mucky, because then you have to refer to the stuff that brought that reboot on, like the big cataclysm or the Big Bang or whatever. Just total fresh start, right? And say, we've got 10 years, right? And in those 10 years, if we want to kill Batman off in year 4, he's dead. And if in 6 years you can bring Bruce Wayne back in the next new universe, that's fine. The new universe probably isn't the best term to use because we don't know how that went. God bless, I love Jim Shooter, but that it was kind of a letdown. Or unfortunate, but so then you can make the threats real to characters, but it also gives you new approaches and new fodder for the movies, because a lot of the movies are pulling from the comics. Right. You can build to an actual end, and you can say, how does the DC universe exist without Superman? We can kill him off, and he's gone. Right. And we have the last 3 years as them like, what the hell do we do? There's no Superman. You can tell all different types of stories that way. But again, kind of another issue I have with the major companies, at least DC, I think has been really bad about this. They do not understand supporting characters at all. And, they don't understand the importance of an alter ego. And they, I think, have been failing miserably, especially in regards to a lot of the Superman books. I think Tom Taylor's Superman. Yeah, so I feel like, I love Tom Taylor's work. I love Superman, Adventures of Superman, John Kent, because that's ultimately about being Superman. But the problem is you don't have an alter ego really for John Kent. He's Superman full time. You look at the Clark Kent books, and he's Clark Kent when it's kind of good for the story, but when's he ever really Clark Kent? When's he pursuing a story? When's he, when are we seeing what it's like for him to have the glasses on and go out? And you basically make being a superhero their world, and they stop being relatable. And they only have relationships with other people who are superheroes, or, again, I mean, part of it's me being the middle-aged guy, go, God, but also like, it just doesn't, it's just not, I don't think it's working. That's right. my issue. I don't think it's working, but but we'll see. I mean, I know when Batman came out, we're all like, yeah, this is great. It's going to be awesome for comics. When, X-Men came out and Spider-Man, they weren't really organized in knowing what to do with it.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
Just sort of one shot.
We'll see.
From reading your book and the synopsis for many of these serials, they kind of did broad strokes with the stories with the characters. They didn't really pull too much from the source material. They sort of created stories that had these characters in it, but not exactly ones taken straight from the comic. Was that mainly a Hollywood decision, or did the comic companies say, I'd rather, you not pull from here?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the comic companies really cared, but so much. I want to say, again, I haven't read my book in about a year, but my memory is Fawcett. So with Fawcett and Republic, it was kind of a sweetheart deal for Republic. But they also, it's interesting with those. I think Spy Smasher's really close to the source material tonally. Captain Marvel, even though he throws a guy to his death off a roof and he mows down people with a machine gun, I'm not aware of anyone that ever really cared enough. You know what I mean? I know with Superman Incorporated, had been formed by National Comics to oversee everything. And what's interesting about Superman is it's based off of the radio show, not the comic book. That's part of what I'm doing right now, is researching that. And so the radio show had the most penetration, right? So I think that was more a matter of bringing the radio character to the big screen, who happened to also be in comic books, because those stories were loosely adapted from some of the radio plays, like the Scarlet Widow, and also Atom Man. But the Atom Man one was very different. Like he was Atom Man in name only. There was no Lex Luthor on radio.
No.
I know with Captain America, Timely got really upset. Like, he doesn't carry a gun. And basically Republic was like, oh, and he's not Grant Gardner. He's, Steve Rogers. Republic was like, well, you didn't give us any comics that said that he didn't carry a gun. So I think what they did was they were like, it would cost us too much money to be able to, dub over, reshoot. One thing I'd read is that having, if you had Steve Rogers as a private, you would then have to like explain how he gets away and that would just slow down the serial itself.
Right.
But that argument is called the fidelity argument, right? Like, oh, it's not like the whatever. Ergo, it's a poor adaptation, which is, it's bunk. I mean, really, like, you want to have a great movie that has a specific character. And I think that in the case of a superhero back then, they didn't really have iconic storylines like we do now. And they didn't really have much of a continuity when you think about it. They were mostly self-contained stories. They might refer to a few other stories from like a couple years ago, but it wasn't like it is now, So I think it was more about conveying the basic idea of the character and having them look, having them look and act enough like them that they could get away with it. But I don't think they were too concerned, because again, their audience were kids, Yeah.
Do you get the sense with these actors that getting a gig in one of these serials was a plum role to have, or was it just sort of a working role that you took, hoping that something bigger might open up?
Yeah, I think it was either a working role that you took, or it was a dead end.
Gotcha.
King Richmond, who played Spy Smasher, was on his way to becoming a leading man, but he ran off and eloped with his co-star and put their honeymoon on the studio's tab. And the head of the studio, as I'm recalling, had an interest in Kane's wife. And so Kane got busted down to beats. And if you look at Kane Richmond in Spy Smasher, he also did some shadows. I mean, he was a leading man. Like, Kane had all of the qualities of a classic movie star. And he was stuck in the bees, in the serials. You don't hear of too many actors who started in the serials and then struck it big. Clayton Moore arguably is the Lone Ranger, but it's not like the Lone Ranger was. I mean, it was a big TV show, but I doubt he was, rolling into millions and getting offers from it,
Do you think DC or Marvel has any interest in bringing these into the fold as properties, or they've sort of washed their hands of it and you can just do what you want?
Well, I mean, some of them are public domain, right?
Right.
There was a Batman Superman story arc. I want to say it was Gene Yang. Apologies if it's not, but it was an homage to the movie serials, and it was gorgeous, man. It was beautiful. I need to find out those issues again. I think I read them on the tablet, but I need to buy the trade. I'm sure they might like acknowledge it kind of in a multiverse way, but I don't think it's, I mean, it'd be great I would love to see I would love to see something more done with like Spy Smash or that bonkers Captain America even. But I mean, where's the money in it,
Right.
and really, like, the audience who would be nostalgic for it are mostly dead. So, I mean, really, it's like, just the weirdos like us who appreciate them and enjoy them.
Right.
But it's really just not, I don't think Warner Discovery or whatever they call themselves now, or like,
Max or something.
like aside going like, oh my God, there's this great 1940s, pitch. Again, I would love to see that. I would love to see like a TV show or a streaming show or something that, places these characters in kind of that era, but with a modern sensibility. I think that would be rad.
Right.
But again, the nostalgia is not really there because, the original viewers are mostly gone, sadly.
What's your sort of idea of these serials' place in history, in comic history, and comic and film history? Are they the groundwork for it, or are they just sort of a footnote for it?
Yeah, I think they are the groundwork. But I mean, we wouldn't have had Adventures of Superman, the TV show, without it, and we wouldn't have had Batman 66. I think mostly in the early days. I do think comics took on many of the qualities of the serials in terms of storytelling, and even those you could safely and well argue they took from the comic strips, the daily comic strips, right? But even those you could argue took from the silent film serials, like Whatever Happened to Mary and Perils of Pauline from like the 1910s or so. On one hand, I feel like they are, kind of, they're an interesting footnote. But the thing that amazes me about them, looking at them through the lens of someone who sees these hyper CGI'd movies that Marvel puts out, and even DC, Warner, whoever, there's a humanity to them, knowing that those were real men in costumes performing these stunts, risking life and limb to make these superheroes a reality. It's why, like, Christopher Reeve, my God, I mean, I show that movie every year or two. The students are always amazed at how much they like it and how much the flying effects hold up really well.
Yeah.
The best special effect was Christopher Reeve knowing how to kind of shift his weight and bank while on wires. Like, that's what made it convincing more than the actual special effect itself. So I mean, I think they're important for us to know about, because I think it also gives us a good glimpse into how the early comics publishers were thinking of superheroes as media figures, right? And what type of penetration that would reach and how that would further the brand. Had we not had the movie serials, again, I don't think anyone would have thought about it enough to even have made a Superman film in 78. Those, I don't think I could say serials kept superheroes alive, but I could say I feel comfortable saying the Adventures of Superman kept superheroes alive. Just, they were on life support, but just long enough for the Silver Age to hit in a flash of lightning, as we know.
Makes sense. So I know we're both coming up on supper time and with our kids and
Oh
stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Just quickly, projects you're working on.
yeah. Well, my kid, he's a project. God bless him. He's my best friend.
Mm,
He's 6, Grayson. Being a dad, that's my
mm,
first project. I'm working on a dissertation in media art text and text at VCU. I'm a professor full time, and part of that is I'm able to do the PhD program, and they cover it, which is great. So my dissertation is actually on Superman in media. I'm writing it this year. I'm defending it next summer. It's funny because like I've written books. I'm not worried at all about writing it. It's the things I have to do to get to the point where I can write it. Like I have to, jump through a couple of hoops, like everyone else in the program. You
mm,
know, that's the big one. My hope is to turn that into more of a book, but the focus on it right now is really going to be on radio and the adventures of Superman, and of course, sandwiched right between them, the Kirk Alyn serials. Those are 3 areas that I don't feel like there's enough scholarship on, especially the radio show.
mm.
And most of the books I'm reading about it, they're like, all they talk about is, Superman versus the clan of the Fiery Cross in the radio show. That's it. Maybe they'll allude to the first couple, but they're not like, I don't think enough scholars writing about Superman. Well, I found 2 who don't know what the hell they're talking about, to be frank. Like one guy actually said, he's a doctor.
Mhm.
Superman's first cartoon was 1939, voiced by Ray Middleton. I'm like, really? You're a doctor and you're published in an academic journal.
Right.
Go away. I haven't read the rest of it, but I will be doing what my colleague refers to as taking it out to the woodshed.
Yeah.
So, but beyond that, there is like people I feel look at the radio show as a footnote, and no, it's more than a footnote. That's where the comic book character really, like, that's where he really became, I feel, an institution, and I think it's where he really developed as in regards to a character of civic and American virtue. So I'm focusing on that. Going to watch all of the adventures, which I've never seen all of, so I'm excited.
Yeah.
I love George Reeves. I love that show. And of course, I'm no stranger to the Kirk Alyn serials, but I'm going to watch them again. And we'll see. If I can get up to the Superman movie, that's wonderful. If I don't get up to it for the dissertation, when I turn this into a book, that's of course, definitely going to be in there. And Smallville, like I really can't wait to. I have like a box and a half at least back there. I've been collecting the print copies of everything from Man of Steel to the Death. And I've never read all of that run because I really got into superhero comics in like the late 80s. And I didn't really get into Superman till like not too long before the death of Superman. So I can't wait to read all of that and then watch all of Smallville together, because Smallville is another thing that I think needs a lot more. And the Superboy TV show, a friend of mine is writing the first academic article on Superboy, the TV show. Yeah, he did a book. Where is it right here? It's comic book film style by my good friend Drew Jeffries.
Okay.
Which is a phenomenal book. I will plug it away. I guess it's University of Texas Press. Anyways, great book. And he's on my dissertation board committee. But full disclosure, but he just wrote the full Superboy, like an academic article on Superboy. And I'm like, we're both like, yeah, no one's covered it. And it's a phenomenal show. And it's important to Superman's development. So there's that. I'm doing more Eagle Force with for Fresh Monkey Fiction. I'm doing another trading card set. We're doing something with the pulp stories again soon. I'm not writing any more pulp stories till the dissertation is done. I'm probably going to revisit that, fill in some gaps, try and put a nice bow on it for the fans. I have Madman atomic action figures are going to the factory soon.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's Madman, Madwoman, and It Girl. And the hope is to do new figures of with original parts of Metal Man, Mr. Gum, and Red Rocket 7, maybe Black Crystal as well. But we're Bill's got to figure some things out on production.
Gotcha.
But that's in the hopper. We have some more Madman stuff coming that's kind of in the works. But so I'm always doing too much.
I was going to say that's quite a few things.
Yeah. Well, once I have this dissertation out of the way, it'll open a whole lot up, and
Right.
I'll be a doctor at that point. So, I can.
That'd be awesome.
Just let's have it done. Maybe in a few years I'll get another one. I don't know.
Nothing wrong with it. And we are back. So, what'd you guys think about that? I had a blast talking to Chris, man after my own heart. So interesting to see how he found out all this information, how he put it all together, and what made him want to do this, chronicling these, really the long lost treasures. You don't see these very often. I know TCM sometimes plays the Batman serials once in a while, but everything else has kind of been lost to time. So hopefully a book like this and interest in it will revive it, put it back out there so fans can check it out. And speaking of checking out, thank you guys for checking out this episode. If you like, please rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends. Let's get these numbers up. We want to become the best podcast and YouTube show we could be for you guys. So have a wonderful weekend, and thanks again.